Welcome to Windy Night Stories. Tonight's story is by A.C. Benson, The Grey Cat. The knight Sir James Lee lived in a remote valley of the Welsh hills. The manor house, of rough grey stone, with thick walls and mullioned windows, stood on a rising ground. At its foot ran a little river, through great boulders. There were woods all about it, but above the woods the bare green hills ran smoothly up, so high that in the winter the sun only peeped above the ridge for an hour or two. Beyond the house, the valley wound away into the heart of the hills, and at the end a black peak looked over. The place was very sparsely inhabited. Within a close of ancient yew trees stood a little stone church, and a small parsonage smothered in ivy, where an old priest, a cousin of the knight, lived. There were but 3 farms in the valley, and a rough track led over the hills, little used, except by drovers. At the top of the path stood a stone cross, and from this point you could see the dark scarred face of the peak to the left, streaked with snow, which did not melt until the summer was far advanced. Sir James was a silent, sad man, in ill health. He spoke little, and bore his troubles bitterly. He was much impoverished, through his own early carelessness, and now so feeble in body that he had small hope of repairing the fortune he had lost. His wife was a wise and loving woman, who, though she found it hard to live happily in so lonely a place with a sickly husband, met her sorrows with a cheerful face, visited her poorer neighbors, and was like a ray of sunshine in the gloomy valley. They had one son, a boy Roderick, now about 15. He was a bright and eager child, who was happy enough, taking his life as he found it. Indeed, he had known no other. He was taught a little by the priest, but he had no other schooling, for Sir James would spend no money except where he was obliged to do so. Roderick had no playmates, but he never found the time to be heavy. He was fond of long, solitary rambles on the hills, being light of foot and strong. One day he had gone out to fish in the stream, but it was bright and still, and he could catch nothing. So at last he laid his rod aside in a hollow place beneath the bank, and wandered without any certain aim along the stream. Higher and higher he went, till he found, looking about him, that he was as high as the pass, and then it came into his mind to track the stream to its source. The manor was now out of sight, and there was nothing round him but the high green hills, with here and there a sheep feeding. Once a kite came out and circled slowly in the sun, pouncing like a plummet far down in the glen. And still Roderick went onwards until he saw that he was at the top of the lower hills, and that the only thing higher than himself was the peak itself. He saw now that the stream ran out of a still black pool some way in front of him, that lay under the very shadow of the dark precipice, and was fed by the snows that melted from the face. It was surrounded by rocks that lay piled in confusion, but the whole place wore an air that was more than desolate. The peak itself had a cruel look, and there was an intense silence, which was only broken, as he gazed, by the sound of rocks falling loudly from the face of the hill and thundering down. The sun warned him that he had gone far enough, and he determined to go homewards, half pleased at his discovery, and half relieved to quit so lonely and grim a spot. That evening, when he sat with his father and mother at their simple meal, he began to say where he had been. His father heard him with little attention, but when Roderick described the dark pool and the sharp front of the peak, he asked him abruptly how near he had gone to the pool. Roderick said that he had seen it from a distance, and then Sir James said somewhat sharply that he must not wander so far, and that he was not to go near that place again. Roderick was surprised by this, for his father as a rule interfered little with what he did. But he did not ask his father the reason, for there was something peevish, even harsh, in his tone. But afterwards, when he went out with his mother, leaving the knight to his own gloomy thoughts, as his will and custom was, his mother said with some urgency, "Roderick, promise me not to go to the pool again. It has an evil name, and is better left to itself." Roderick was eager to know the story of the place, but his mother would not tell him. Only she would have him promise, so he promised, but complained that he would rather have had a reason given for his promise. But his mother, smiling and holding his hand, said that it would be enough for him to please her by doing her will. So Roderick gave his promise again, but was not satisfied. The next day Roderick was walking in the valley and met one of the farmers, a young good-humored man, who had always been friendly with the boy and had often been to fish with him. Roderick walked beside him and told him that he had followed the stream nearly to the pool when the young farmer, with some seriousness, asked him how near he had been to the water. Roderick was surprised at the same question that his father had asked him being asked again, and told him that he had but seen it from the hilltop near, adding, "But what is amiss with the place? For my father and mother have made me promise not to go again." The young farmer said nothing for a moment, but seemed to reflect. Then he said that there were stories about the place, stories that perhaps it was foolish to believe, but he went on to say that it was better to be on the safe side in all things, and that place had an evil fame. Then Roderick, with childish eagerness, asked him what the stories were, and little by little the farmer told him. He said that something dwelt near or in the pool, it was not known what, that had an enmity for the life of man, that twice since he was a boy a strange thing had happened there. A young shepherd had come by his death at the pool, and was found lying in the water, strangely battered. That, he said, was long before Roderick was born. Then he added, "You remember old Richard the shepherd?" "What?" said Roderick. "The old strange man that used to go about muttering to himself, that boys threw stones at?" "Yes," said the farmer, "the very same. Well, he was not always so. I remember him a strong and cheerful man. But once when the sheep had got lost in the hills, he would go down to the pool because he thought he heard them calling there, though we prayed him not to go. He came back, indeed, bringing no sheep, but an altered and broken man, as he was thenceforth, and as you knew him. He had seen something by the pool, he could not say what, and had a sore strife to get away." "But what sort of thing is this?" said Roderick. "Is it a beast or man, or what?" "Neither," said the farmer very gravely. "You have heard them read in the church of the evil spirits who dwelt with men, and entered their bodies, and it was sore work even for the Lord Christ to cast them forth. I think it is one of these who has wandered thither. They say he does not go far from the pool, for he cannot abide the cross on the pass, and the church bell gives him pains." And then the farmer looked at Roderick and said, "You know they ring the bell all night on the Feast of Souls." "Yes," said Roderick, "I have heard it ring." "Well, on that night alone," said the farmer, "they say that spirits have power upon men, and come abroad to do them hurt, and so they ring the bell, which the spirits cannot listen to. But, young master, it is ill to talk of these things, and Christian men should not even think of them. But as I said, though Satan has but little power over the baptized soul, yet even so, says the priest, he can enter in, if the soul be willing to admit him. And so I say, avoid the place. It may be that these are silly stories to affright folk, but it is ill to touch pitch, and no good can be got by going to that pool, and perhaps evil. And now I think I have told you enough, and more than enough." For Roderick was looking at him pale and with wide open eyes. Is it strange that from that day the thing that Roderick most desired was to see the pool and what dwelt there? I think not. When hearts are young and before trouble has laid its heavy hand upon them, the hard and cruel things of life, wounds, blows, agonies, terrors, seen only in the mirrors of another spirit, are but as a curious and lively spectacle that feeds the mind with wonder. These stories to which Roderick had listened in church, of men who were haunted by demons, seemed to him as dim and distant experiences on which he would fain look, and the fainter the thought of his promise grew, the stronger grew his desire to see for himself. In the month of June, when the heart is light, and the smell of the woods is fresh and sharp, Roderick's father and mother were called to go on a journey to see an ancient friend who was thought to be dying. The night before they set off, Roderick had a strange dream. It seemed to him that he wandered over bare hillsides, and came at last to the pool. The peak rose sharp and clear, and the water was very black and still. While he gazed upon it, it seemed to be troubled. The water began to spin round and round, and bubbling waves rose and broke on the surface. Suddenly a hand emerged from the water, and then a head, bright and unwetted, as though the water had no power to touch it. Roderick saw that it was a man of youthful aspect and commanding mien. He waded out to the shore and stood a moment looking around him. Then he beckoned Roderick to approach, looking at him kindly, and spoke to him gently, saying that he had waited for him long. They walked together to the crag, and then, in some way that Roderick could not clearly see, the man opened a door into the mountain, and Roderick saw a glimmering passage within. The air came out laden with a rich and heavy fragrance, and there was a faint sound of distant music in the hill. The man turned and looked upon Roderick as though inviting him to enter, but Roderick shook his head and refused, saying that he was not ready, at which point the man stepped inside with a smile, half of pity, and the door was shut. Then Roderick woke with a start and wished that he had been bold enough to go within the door. The light came in serenely through the window, and he heard the faint piping of awakening birds in the dewy trees. He could not sleep, and presently dressed himself and went down. Soon the household was awake, for the night was to start betimes. Roderick sat at the early meal with his father and mother. His father was cumbered with the thought of the troublesome journey, and asked many questions about the baggage. So Roderick said little, but felt his mother's eyes dwell on his face with love. Soon after they rode away, Roderick stood at the door to see them go, and there was so eager and bright a look on his face that his mother was somehow troubled, and almost called him to her to make him repeat his promise, but she feared he would feel that she did not trust him, and therefore put the thought aside, and so they rode away, his mother waving her hand till they turned a corner by the wood and were out of sight. Then Roderick began to consider how he would spend the day, with a half-formed design in his mind, when suddenly the temptation to visit the pool came upon him with a force he had neither strength nor inclination to resist. So he took his rod, which might seem to be an excuse, and set off rapidly up the stream. He was surprised to find how swiftly the hills rose all about him, and how easily he went. Very soon he came to the top, and there lay the pool in front of him, with the shadow of the peak that rose behind it very clear and sharp. He hesitated no longer, but ran lightly down the slope, and the next moment he was on the brink of the pool. It lay before him very bright and pure, like a jewel of sapphire, the water being of deep azure blue. He went all round it. There was no sign of life in the water. At the very end nearest the cliff, he found a little cool runnel of water that bubbled into the pool from the cliffs. No grass grew round it, and he could see the stones sloping down and becoming more beautiful the deeper they lay, from the pure tint of the water. He looked all round him. The moorland quivered in the bright hot air, and he could see far away the hills lie like a map, with the blue mountains on the horizon, and small green valleys where men dwelt. He sat down by the pool, and he had a thought of bathing in the water, but his courage did not rise to this, because he felt still as though something sat in the depths that would not show itself, but might come forth and drag him down. So he sat at least by the pool, and presently he fell asleep. When he woke he felt somewhat chilly. The shadow of the peak had come round, and fell on the water. The place was still as calm as ever, but looking upon the pool, he had an obscure sense as though he were being watched by an unclosing eye. But he was thirsting from the heat, so he drew up, in his closed hands, some of the water, which was very cool and sweet, and his drowsiness came upon him, and again he slept. When he next woke, it was with a sense of delicious ease, and the thought that someone who loved him was near him, stroking his hand. He looked up, and there close to his side sat very quietly what gave him a shock of surprise. It was a great gray cat, with soft, abundant fur, which turned its yellow eyes upon him lazily, purred, and licked his hand. He caressed the cat, which arched its back, and seemed pleased to be with him, and presently leapt upon his knee. The soft warmth of the fur against his hands, and the welcoming caresses of this fearless wild creature pleased him greatly. He sat long in quiet thought, taking care not to disturb the cat, which, whenever he took his hand away, rubbed against him as though to show that it was pleased at his touch. But at last he thought that he must go homewards, for the day began to turn to the west. So he put the cat off his knee and began to walk to the top of the pass, as it was quicker to follow the road. For a while the cat accompanied him, sometimes rubbing his leg and sometimes walking in front, but looking round from time to time as though to consult his pleasure. Roderick began to hope that it would accompany him home, but at a certain place the cat stopped and would go no further. Roderick lifted it up, but it leapt from him as if displeased, and at last he left it reluctantly. In a moment he came within sight of the cross in the hilltop, so he saw the road was near. Often he looked round and saw the great cat regarding him as though it were sorry to be left, till at last he could see it no more. He went home well pleased, his head full of happy thoughts. He had gone half expecting to see some dreadful thing, but had found instead a creature who seemed to love him. The next day he went again, and this time he found the cat sitting by the pool. As soon as it saw him, it ran to him with a glad and yearning cry, as though it had feared he would not return. Today it seemed brighter and larger to look upon, and he was pleased that when he returned by the stream it followed him much farther, leaping lightly from stone to stone. But at a certain place, where the valley began to turn eastward, just before the little church came in sight, it sat down as before and took its leave of him. The third day he began to go up the valley again, but while he rested in a little wood that came down to the stream, to his surprise and delight, the cat sprang out of a bush and seemed more than ever glad of his presence. While he sat fondling it, he heard the sound of footsteps coming up the path. But the cat heard the sound too, and as he rose to see who was coming, the cat sprang lightly into a tree beside him and was hidden from his sight. It was the old priest on his way to an upland farm, who spoke fondly to Roderick and asked him of his mother and father. Roderick told him that they were to return that night, and said that it was too bright to remain indoors and yet too bright to fish. The priest agreed, and after a little more talk rose to go, and as his manner was, holding Roderick by the hand, he blessed him, saying that he was growing a tall boy. When he was gone, and Roderick was ashamed to find how eager he was that the priest should go, he called low to the cat to come back. But the cat came not, and though Roderick searched the tree into which it had sprung, he could find no sign of it, and supposed that it had crept into the wood. That evening the travelers returned, the night seeming cheerful, because the vexatious journey was over. But Roderick was half ashamed to think that his mind had been so full of his new plaything that he was hardly glad to see his parents return. Presently his mother said, "You look very bright and happy, dear child," and Roderick, knowing that he spoke falsely, said that he was glad to see them again. His mother smiled and asked him what he had been doing, and he said that he had wandered on the hills, for it was too bright to fish. His mother looked at him for a moment, and he knew in his heart that she wondered if he had kept his promise. But he thought of his secret, and looked at her so straight and full that she asked him no further questions. The next day he woke feeling sad, because he knew that there would be no chance to go to the pool. He went to and fro with his mother, for she had many little duties to attend to. At last she said, "What are you thinking of, Roderick? You seem to have little to say to me." She said it laughingly, and Roderick was ashamed, but said that he was only thinking, and so bestirred himself to talk. But late in the day he went a little alone through the wood, and reaching the end of it, looked up to the hill, kissing his hand toward the pool as a greeting to his friend, and as he returned, the cat came swiftly and lovingly out of the wood to him, and he caught it up in his arms and clasped it close, where it lay as if contented. Then he thought that he would carry it to the house, and say nothing as to where he had found it. But hardly had he moved a step when the cat leapt from him and stood as though angry. And it came into Roderick's mind that the cat was his secret friend, and that their friendship must be somehow unknown. But he loved it even the better for that. In the weeks that followed, the knight was ill and the lady much at home. From time to time Roderick saw the cat. He could never tell when it would visit him. It came and went unexpectedly, and always in some lonely and secret place. But gradually Roderick came to care for nothing else. His fishing and his riding were forgotten, and he began to plan how he might be alone, so that the cat would come to him. He began to lose his spirits and be dull without it, and to hate the hours when he could not see it. And all the time it grew or seemed to grow stronger and sleeker. His mother soon began to notice that he was not well. He became thin and listless, but his eyes were large and bright, She asked him more than once if he were well, but he only laughed. Once, indeed, he had a fright. He had been asleep under a hawthorn in the glen on a hot July day, and waking, saw the cat close to him, watching him intently with yellow eyes, as if it were about to spring upon him, but seeing him awake, it came wheedling and fondling him as though before. But he could not forget the look in its eyes, and felt grave and sad. Then he began to be troubled with dreams. The man whom he had seen in his former dream rising from the pool was often with him. Sometimes he led him to pleasant places, but one dream he had, that he was bathing in the pool, and caught his foot between the rocks and could not draw it out. Then he heard a rushing sound, and looking round saw a great stream of water was plunging heavily into the pool, so that it rose every moment and was soon up to his chin. Then he saw in his dream that the man sat on the edge of the pool and looked at him with a cold smile, but did not offer to help, till at last, when the water touched his lips, the man rose and held out his hand, and the stream ceased to run, and presently his foot came out of the rock easily, and he swam ashore but saw no one. Then it came to autumn, and the days grew colder and shorter, and he could not be so much abroad. He felt, too, less and less disposed to stir out, and it now began to be on his mind that he had broken his promise to his mother, and for a week he saw nothing of the cat, though he longed to see it. But one night, as he went to bed, when he had put out his light, he saw that the moon was very bright, and he opened the window and looked out, and saw the gleaming stream in the gray valley. He was turning away, when he heard a light sound of scratching of claws, and presently the cat sprang upon the window-sill and entered the room. It was now cold, and he got into bed, and the cat sprang upon his pillow, and Roderick was so glad that the cat had returned that while he caressed it, he talked to it in low tones. Suddenly there came a step at the door, and a light beneath it, and his mother with a candle entered the room. She stood for a moment looking, and Roderick became aware that the cat was gone. Then his mother came near, thinking he was asleep, and he sat up. She said to him, "Dear child, I heard you speaking, and wondered whether you were in a dream." And she looked at him with an anxious gaze, and he said, "Was I speaking, mother? I was asleep, and must have spoken in a dream." Then she said, "Roderick, you are not old enough yet to sleep so uneasily. Is all well, dear child?" And Roderick, hating to deceive his mother, said, "How should not all be well?" So she kissed him and went away, but Roderick heard her sighing. Then it came at last to All Souls' Day, and Roderick, going to his bed that night, had a strange dizziness and cried out, and found the room swim around him. Then he got up into his bed, for he thought that he must be ill, and soon fell asleep. And in his sleep he dreamed a dreadful dream. He thought that he lay on the hills beside the pool, and yet he was out of the body, for he could see himself lying there. The pool was very dark, and a cold wind ruffled the waves. And again the water was troubled, and the man stepped out, but behind him came another man, like a hunchback, very swarthy of face, with long, thin arms that looked to be both strong and evil. Then it seemed as if the first man pointed to Roderick where he lay, and said, "You can take him hence, for he is mine now, and I have need of him," adding, "Who could have thought that it would be so easy?" And then he smiled very bitterly, and the hunchback went towards himself, and he tried to cry out in warning, and straining, woke, and in the chilly dawn he saw the cat sit in his room, but very different from what it had been. It was gaunt and famished, and the fur was all marred. Its yellow eyes gleamed horribly, and Roderick saw that it hated him, he knew not why. And such fear came upon him that he screamed out, and as he screamed the cat rose as if furious, twitching its tail and opening its mouth. But he heard steps without, and screamed again, and his mother came in haste into the room, and the cat was gone in a moment, and Roderick held out his hands to his mother, and she soothed and quieted him, and presently with many sobs he told her all the story. She did not reproach him, nor say a word of his disobedience. The fear was too urgent upon her. She tried to think for a little that it was the sight of some real creature lingering in a mind that was wrought by illness. But those were not the days when men preferred to call the strange afflictions of body and spirit, the sad scars that stain the fair works of God, by reasonable names. She did not doubt that by some dreadful hap her own child had somehow crept within the circle of darkness, and she only thought of how to help and rescue him. That he was sorry, and that he did not wholly consent, was her hope. So she merely kissed and quieted him, and then she told him that she would return anon and he must rest quietly. But he would not let her leave him, so she stood at the door and called a servant softly. Sir James was long abed, for he had been in ill health that day, and she gave a word that someone must be found at once to go and call the priest, saying that Roderick was ill and she was uneasy. Then she came back to the bed, and holding Roderick's hand, she said that he must try to sleep. Roderick said to her, "Mother, say that you forgive me," to which she only replied, "Dear child, do I not love you better than all in the world? Do not think of me now, only ask help of God." So she sat with his hand in both of her own, and presently he fell asleep. But she saw that he was troubled in his dreams, for he groaned and cried out often. And now through the window she heard the soft tolling of the bell of the church, and she knew that a contest must be fought out that night over the child. But after a sore passage of misery, and a bitter questioning as to why one so young and innocent must be thus bound with evil bonds, she found strength to leave the matter in the Father's hands, and to pray with an eager hopefulness. But the time passed heavily, and still the priest did not arrive, and the ghostly terror was so sore on the child that she could bear it no longer and awakened him, and he told her in broken words of the terrible things that had oppressed him, sore fightings and struggles, and a voice in his ear that it was too late, that he had yielded himself to evil. And at last there came a quiet footfall on the stair, and the old priest himself entered the room, looking anxious, yet calm, and seeming to bring a holy peace with him. Then she bade the priest sit down, and so the two sat by the bedside, with the solitary lamp burning in the chamber, and she would have had Roderick tell the tale, but he covered his face with his hands and could not. So she told the tale herself to the priest, saying, "Correct me, Roderick, if I am wrong." And once or twice the boy corrected her, and added a few words to make the story plain, and then they sat a while in silence, while the terrified looks of the mother and her son dwelt on the old priest's strongly lined face, yet they found comfort in the smile with which he met them. At length he said, "Yes, dear lady and dear Roderick, the case is plain enough. The child has yielded himself to some evil power, but not too far, I think, and now we must meet the foe with all our might. I will abide here with the boy, and, dear lady, you were better in your chamber, for we know not what will pass. If there were need, I would call you." Then the lady said, "I will do as you direct me, father, but I would fain stay." Then he said, "Nay, but there are things on which a Christian should not look, lest they should daunt his faith. So go, dear lady, and help us with your prayers." Then she said, "I will be below, and if you beat your foot thrice upon the floor, I will come. Roderick, I shall be close at hand. Only be strong, and all shall be well." And then she went softly away. Then the priest said to Roderick, "And now, dear son, confess your sin and let me shrive you." So Roderick made confession, and the priest blessed him. But while he blessed him, there came the angry crying of a cat from somewhere in the room, so that Roderick shuddered in his bed. Then the priest drew from his robe a little holy book, and with a reverence laid it under Roderick's hand, and he himself took his book of prayers and said, "Sleep now, dear son, fear not." So Roderick closed his eyes, and being very weary, slept, and the old priest in a low whisper said the blessed psalms. And it came to near midnight, and the place that the priest had read was, "Thou shalt not be afraid for any terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the sickness that destroyed in the noonday." And suddenly there it ran as if it were a shiver through his bones, and he knew that the time had come. He looked at Roderick, who slept wearily on his bed, and it seemed to him as though a small and shadowy thing, like a bird, leapt from the boy's mouth and onto the bed. It was like a wren, only white, with dusky spots on it. And the priest held his breath, for now he knew that the soul was out of the body, and that unless it could return uninjured to the limbs of the child, nothing could avail the boy. And then he said quietly in his heart to God that if he so willed, he should take the boy's life, if only his soul should be saved. Then the priest was aware of a strange and horrible thing. There sprang softly onto the bed the form of a great gray cat, very lean and angry, which stood there as though ready to spring upon the bird, which hopped hither and thither as though careless of what might be. The priest cast a glance upon the boy, who lay rigid and pale, his eyes shut, and hardly seeming to breathe, as though dead and prepared for burial. Then the priest signed the cross and said in nomine, and as the holy words fell on the air, the cat looked fiercely at the bird, but seemed to shrink into itself, and then it slipped away. Then the priest's fear was that the bird might stray further outside of his care, and yet he dared not try and wake the boy, for he knew that this was death, if the soul was thrust apart from the body, and if he broke the unseen chain that bound them. So he waited and prayed, and the bird hopped upon the floor, and then presently the priest saw the cat draw near again, and in a stealthy way, and now the priest himself was feeling weary of the strain, for he seemed to be wrestling in spirit with something that was strong and strongly armed. But he signed the cross again and said faintly, in nomine, and the cat again withdrew. Then a dreadful drowsiness fell upon the priest, and he thought that he must sleep. Something heavy, leaden-handed, and powerful seemed to be busy in his brain. Meanwhile the bird hopped upon the window-sill, and stood as if preparing its wings for a flight. Then the priest beat with his foot upon the floor, for he could no longer battle. In a moment the lady glided in, and seemed as though scared to find the scene of so fierce an encounter so still and quiet. She would have spoken, but the priest signed her to be silent, and pointed the boy into the bird, and then she partly understood. So they stood in silence, but the priest's brain grew more numb, though he was aware of a creeping blackness that seemed to overshadow the bird, in the midst of which glared two bright eyes. So in a sudden effort he signed the cross, and said in nomine again, and at the same moment the lady held out her hand, and the priest sank down on the floor, and he saw the bird raise its wings for a flight, and just as the dark thing rose, and, as it were, struck open-mouthed, the bird sailed softly through the air, alighted on the lady's hand, and then with a light flutter of wings onto the bed and to the boy's face, and was seen no more. At the same moment the bell stopped in the church and left a sweet silence. The black form shrank and slipped aside, and seemed to fall on the ground. Outside there was a shrill and bitter cry which echoed horribly in the air, and the boy opened his eyes and smiled, and his mother fell on his neck and kissed him. Then the priest said, "Give God the glory," and blessed them, and was gone so softly that they knew not when he went, for he had other work to do. Then mother and son had great joy together. But the priest walked swiftly and sternly through the wood and to the church, and he dipped a vessel in the stoup of holy water, turning his eyes aside, and wrapped it in a veil of linen. Then he took a lantern in his hand, and with a grave and fixed look on his face, he walked sadly up the valley, putting one foot in front of the other, like a man who forced himself to go unwilling. There were strange sounds on the hillside, the crying of sad birds and the beating of wings, and sometimes a hollow groaning seemed to come down the stream. But the priest took no heed, and went on heavily till he reached the stone cross, where the wind whistled dry in the grass. Then he struck off across the moorland. Presently he came to a rise in the ground, and here, though it was dark, he seemed to see a blacker darkness in the air where the peak lay. But beneath the peak he saw a strange sight, for the pool shone with a faint white light that showed the rocks about it. The priest never turned his head, but walked thither with his head bent, repeating words to himself, but hardly knowing what he said. Then he came to the brink, and there he saw a dreadful sight. In the water writhed large and luminous worms, that came sometimes up to the surface, as though to breathe, and sank again. The priest knew well enough that it was a device of Satan's to frighten him, so he delayed not, but setting the lantern down on the ground, he stood. the lantern was obscured as by the rush of bat-like wings. But the priest took the veil off the vessel, and holding it up in the air, he let the water fall in the pool, saying softly, "Lord, let them be bound." But when the holy water touched the lake, there was a strange sight, for the bright worms quivered and fell to the depth of the pool, and a shiver passed over the surface, and the light went out like a flickering lamp. Then there came a foul yelling from the stones, and with a roar like thunder, rocks fell crashing from the face of the peak, and then all was still. Then the priest sat down and covered his face with his hands, for he was sore spent. But he rose at length, and with grievous pain made his slow way down the valley, and reached the parsonage house at last. Roderick lay long between life and death, and youth and a quiet mind prevailed. Years have passed since that day. All those that I have spoken of are dust. But in the window of the old church hangs a picture in glass, which shows Christ standing, with one lying at his feet from whom he has cast out a devil. And on a scroll are the words, "De abyssis terrae iterum reduci me," which may be written in English, "Yea, and broughtest me from the deep of the earth again." The end.